we have discovered that the early mosques of Islam all faced the ancient city of Petra. But does the city of Petra fit the Islamic descriptions of the original holy city of Islam?
دان غريب، يعني أنت تقول إن البتراء لكن البخاري يقول لنا هي القدس، فشلون تبي نفكر في هذا الأمر؟ شلون تبينا نقبل هذا الشيء؟ يعني البخاري قال لنا القدس.
And I agree, Bukhari says it was Jerusalem. But Bukhari is writing some 200 years after Muhammad, and he's writing more than 100 years after the Qibla change took place. So he's not an eyewitness. He's just collecting what people are remembering. And he actually notes several conflicting ideas that were circulating at the time.
While some people were offering morning prayer at Quba, a man came to them and said, "A Quranic order has been revealed to Allah's apostle tonight, that he should face the Kaaba at Mecca. So you too should turn your faces towards it." At that moment, their faces were towards Syria. And on hearing this, they turned towards the Kaaba at Mecca.
I believe that originally Muhammad, while living in Medina, prayed north towards Petra, which was in the Roman province of Syria. By the time Bukhari was collecting his stories, people had forgotten Petra, and everyone remembered that their great-grandparents prayed towards Syria.
القرآن يقول لنا مسجد الحرام في بكة. فيا ترى بكة وين موقعها الحقيقي؟
Those who bring up the argument about Becca raise an interesting point. I agree that in Islamic literature, the name Becca is synonymous with the first holy city of Islam. When Muhammad was a young man, the people decided to rebuild the Kaaba. In the rubble, they found several building blocks with inscriptions written in Syriac, the language of the Nabateans. They found a Jew who could translate it for them.
"I am Allah, the Lord of Becca. I created it on the day that I created heaven and earth, and formed the sun and moon, and I surrounded it with 7 pious angels. It will stand whilst its 2 mountains stand, as a blessing to its people with milk and water."
The word Becca is an ancient Semitic word which means to weep or lament. If a location was assigned the title Becca, it would mean the place of weeping. The name Becca has never been used of Jerusalem. It appears only once in the Bible in Psalm 84. Here it is used in reference to a valley of weeping. But the Quran also speaks of a valley of weeping, where Hagar was weeping over Ishmael. The Quran places this story in Becca, which is the early name for the place where the Kaaba was built. Surely this location was not Jerusalem, which is built on top of a mountain and not in a valley. I think the answer is quite simple. There were many major earthquakes in Petra, such as the one in 551 AD, only 19 years before Muhammad was born. We are told that during that earthquake, much of Petra was destroyed. Petra could have been called the Valley of Becca because so many people were killed over so many years from all the earthquakes.
If Petra is the holy city of Islam, then there should be evidence of Muhammad's tribe, the Quraysh, around Petra.
Long ago, this was known as the city of Hawar, or Humayma as it is known today. Archaeologists have uncovered a farmhouse belonging to the Abbasid family and a mosque built some time later. When the Muslims of Iraq defeated the Umayyads of Damascus, they wanted a member of Muhammad's family to support and legitimize their revolt. And so they came here to Humayma, 27 miles from Petra. It was here that they found Muhammad's family and the Quraysh tribe. They didn't go to Mecca in Saudi Arabia or Medina. They came here to Humayma, 27 miles outside of Petra. It was here that they found the Quraysh tribe and the family of Muhammad, not in Saudi Arabia. There is a story told by all of the early biographers of Muhammad. It concerns Abdullah, Muhammad's father. He was working in the field one day, and he came home with dirt on his hands. He went in to his first wife and said, "Lie with me," but she refused because he was dirty. So he went out, washed off the soil, went into his next wife, Amina. She conceived, and in this way, Muhammad was born. What is important to us about this story is that all of the early writers use the same word for the dirt on Abdullah's hands. They all use an Arabic word for soil, especially the soil of a cultivated plot or field. The problem is, there is no cultivatable land near Mecca. However, when we come to Petra, we discover that Petra had water, fields, and trees.
According to archaeologists, there were private and public gardens, as well as running water brought into the city through aqueducts and clay pipes. Archaeologists have described fruit trees, grapes, and gardens existing in ancient Petra. Even today, there are cultivated plots of land between Petra and El Beida, which is 5 kilometers away. By analyzing ancient soil, researchers have discovered that only 100 years ago, the hills around Petra were covered with trees, including oak, juniper, pistachio, and carob.
The holy city have trees and fields. It was also a walled city. Ibn Ishaq says, and they surrounded him by the walls of Mecca. This is very puzzling because Mecca had no city walls. So what about Petra? Petra was built in a valley. On either side of the valley were large mountains with cliffs. These cliffs were as good as city walls. So the people of Petra built walls from one mountain cliff to the other mountain cliff, both on this side of the valley and also on the other side of the valley. So Petra had city walls. Another distinctive feature in Petra is that it contains a very unique stream. Now, usually you have a valley with mountains on one side, mountains on the other, and a stream running down the center of the valley. But in this case, long ago, earthquakes cracked these mountains so that there is a crack in that mountain, water runs through that crack, across the valley, and out the crack in the other side. The Nabateans built a colonnaded street from one mountain to the other mountain, and beside it was a rainwater course. Let's go down there. Now, in Islam, one of the duties of the pilgrims is to go 7 times between 2 mountains called Marwa and Safa. What is interesting is that Bukhari tells us that Muhammad chose to do this running in the rainwater course between the 2 mountains. But there are problems. Safa and Marwa are just small rocks. Today they're housed right inside of the mosque building. As you can see on this drawing, there was no rainwater course between these 2 rocks. But here in Petra, the description fits exactly from one mountain to the other. There are 4 ways into the Petra Basin. Since Petra is in a valley, one could enter from either end of the valley.
During the year of the contest of Mecca, the Prophet entered Mecca through its upper part.
But there were also other ways of entering Petra. The ancient records tell us that the holy city could be entered and exited by a crack in the rocks. In Arabic, this is called a thaniya. Al-Bukhari mentions this several times.
Allah's apostle used to enter Mecca from the high Thaniya and used to leave Mecca from the low Thaniya. The Prophet went on advancing till he reached the Thaniya through which one would go to them, that is, the people of Quraysh.
There are two Thania entrances. One of these is the famous Sikh that tourists pass through to enter the city. The other is on the far side of the colonnaded street and leads into a maze of canyons that eventually empty out into Wadi Araba below the Dead Sea. Petra also has many temples. Over here is what is known today as the Temple of the Winged Lions, or the Temple to Al-Uzza. Behind me is what is known as Kesser al-Bint today, or the Temple to the god Dushera. This short chain of mountains here was the home to the god, and here in the very heart of the mountains is the temple to this god, El-Dushera.
Now, Ibn Hisham relates to us a very interesting story. It's very early in Islamic history. Only a few people have converted to Islam at this time. One of those was a man known as Al-Tufail bin Amr of Mecca. He accepted Islam on one of his journeys, and once he returned home to Mecca, his wife also decided to accept Islam. Al-Tufail then tells his wife to go to the temple of Dushera and cleanse herself there. In the sacred area, there was a trickle of water where she could wash herself. She did this and returned home and learned about Islam.
Did this story take place in Mecca, 1,000 kilometers away, where there is no temple to Dushera? Or did it take place here in Petra? If it did, then Dushera's temple is there. She would have come down to this temple, washed herself, and gone home.
Now, Al-Haqtab had so harassed Zayd that he forced him to withdraw to the upper part of Mecca, and he stopped in the mountain of Hira, facing the town.
It's interesting to note that in this account, Mount Hira is located in the upper part of Mecca. If you go to Mecca today, the cave of Hira doesn't face the city. But here in Petra, the high side of the city is north of the colonnaded street, and the low part of the city is south of the colonnaded street. In effect, the city was divided in half by the colonnaded street.
If Petra is the holy city of Mecca, then the cave where Muhammad received his first revelation should be located there.
The ancient records say that the cave faced the town, and that it was low down since Muhammad tried to climb the mountain to throw himself off. Here in this cave, we can see where there are many various god blocks. Up there is a large crescent symbol. This is just the sort of cave where young men would go to contemplate the meaning of life. The descriptions and location of this cave are just like the ancient records describe it. Just outside of the city, the entrance facing the city, and evidence that people spent time here in religious worship and meditation. I think that this is one of the holiest spots for all of Islam, and it's here in Petra.
Now, the forbidden gathering place wasn't a building. It was much more than this. It was a large area marked out with special stones. These stones marked the boundary around the sacred area. Now, what kind of stones would you need to mark out such an area? If you had just small round stones, they would be lost among the other stones of the desert. They must have been larger stones. And there should have been something special about them, so that you knew for certain that this was the boundary of the sacred area. Today, in Mecca, there are no special boundary stones. Historians have long wondered what these marker stones might have looked like, but they seem to have been lost in the years that have passed since then. Or perhaps they were never there. If Petra is the original holy city of Islam, then of course the special stones wouldn't be in Mecca. They would be in Petra.
Now there's a feature about Petra that's absolutely fascinating. Whenever tourists come to this city, they pass by a number of square-cut stones known as the Jinn rocks. This is a fanciful name given to them by the local Bedouin. What is interesting is that there are more than 20 of these large square stones marking all of the entrances of the city. Is it possible that these mark out the forbidden sanctuary? Perhaps that's why they're not located in Mecca.